Kevin Hollinrake, Conservative Member of Parliament and the Shadow Secretary of State for Communities, Housing and Local Government, and a former colleague of mine. Kevin, hi, how are you?
Evening, Jonathan. Very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And look, thank you for coming on. And I know it was a short notice as well after a colleague had to drop out, and I appreciate that immensely. First of all, we can't avoid it. Nigel Farage has obviously come out saying that he would scrap the two-child benefit cap. He'd fully reintroduce the winter fuel payment to all eligible pensioners. And he would obviously want to see the £20,000 tax threshold for the personal allowance come in, as he says, when the economic circumstances are correct. Is this something that you fear in the Conservative Party? Does this show Nigel Farage is able to win both left and right? Or is this economic uncredibility, as Tim Montgomery was saying earlier, and going to be the Achilles heel for Reform UK?
I think the latter. I mean, your station is the home of common sense, Jonathan, as you said. And it's common sense that when you make spending pledges, you actually fund those pledges. And there's so many of those things you just mentioned that are completely unfunded and are really significant amounts of spending. I mean, the two-child limit on tax credits, this is our universal credit, is about £4 billion a year. And Nigel Farage said today, when questioned by the journalists there today after he'd made his speech, that the numbers don't add up. So the people listening to your show are people who have to make ends meet, have to balance the books, whether it be their households or their businesses, and that's just not what's happening at Reform.
And with this commitment, is this something that you can say the Conservative Party firmly rules out? They would not lift the two-child cap benefit. That would remain in place?
Yes, absolutely. We're clear on that, is that having children is a choice, and the people make those choices on the basis there is a limit to what the taxpayer can fund. That's very clear. The winter fuel allowance, of course, is a completely different thing. You don't have a choice about getting old, and it's a privilege to do so, the fact we're living longer these days. So we think that should be reinstated. It was a terrible policy implemented by a terrible Chancellor and a terrible Prime Minister, and we said we'll reverse that. But you can't simply continually add to the benefits bill and just keep sending the bill to the taxpayer. That's what's happening. And Nigel Farage is always talking about trying to get taxes low, as we are too. You can't keep adding to the benefits bill and still reduce taxes. It's just not possible.
With the winter fuel there, Kevin, are you saying that you would fully reinstate it? You think that it should go back to all pensioners, or would you want to see some level of means testing?
Well, our position is clear. We voted against the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance, and that means it goes back to everybody. So yes is the short answer. It goes back to everybody. I think there is definitely an argument in a properly thought through policy how you could bring in a means testing at a much higher level. Of course, famously the millionaires getting winter fuel allowance, and we don't think that's right. But that's difficult to do right now. The way we calculate income is not at a household level, so it's very difficult to say to a household you should be getting it and you shouldn't. That should be work in progress, and that's not to say there wouldn't be adjustments to that down the line. But at the moment, the cut-off is £11,500. And even below that figure, you still have to fill in a lot of forms, a 20-page form, to get pension credit, which then gives you access to winter fuel allowance. We think that is terrible policy. 20-odd thousand of my constituents are affected by the withdrawal of that, most of whom are on very low incomes. So it's simply wrong. It was done in haste. You've got to make this change quickly, and crucially, you've got to make this change before this winter. And there should be a full apology for what Labour's done, because they put a lot of people through some hardship over the last winter. It's got to be reinstated before next winter.
Now, you say the policy of the two-child cap is about £4 billion, others say about £3.5 billion, but let's go in between those figures. What would the Conservative Party do with £3.5 to £4 billion to help children in poverty? Because ultimately, Reform would say that by reversing the two-child cap, it's estimated 500,000 children could be immediately lifted out of poverty. How would you tackle child poverty?
Well, that's the point, though, John. We haven't got £3.5 billion. This is extra spending. It's not like you saved anything. You know, if you commit to abolishing the two-child cap, you've got to find £3.5, £4 billion, whatever that number is. It's a lot of money. You've got the best way to take people out of poverty. You know what that is, Jonathan. I think most people at home know what that is, and that's get people in work, and more work, and better paid work. And we suffered criticism as a party but for lifting that, introducing the national living wage and lifting it to record levels. And that's And that's where it's gone to. So lots more people are living a better life because of that. And also we lifted the tax threshold to about £12,000. So you're paying less tax now on those low incomes. That's the best way to get children out of poverty and adults out of poverty. Better paid work, more work, better paid work, lower taxation. That's what we've always committed to, that direction of travel.
But Kevin, we say that, but actually since 2010, we didn't see wages really significantly increase over the course of the Conservative government. If you look at places like I live in Stoke-on-Trent, we didn't see high-skilled, high-wage jobs come. We saw more high-skilled jobs in the southeast where it's been two-bedded, but you, as someone who represents a northern community and myself, didn't see that delivery of levelling up, those new jobs. Why is it that Microsoft won't set up in Stoke-on-Trent where they have, for example, the UK leading video games university in the country? Why is it that we haven't seen other big companies move to other parts of the country? Surely that is a failure of Conservative policy to not spread the wealth, and therefore this child cap benefit is needed to be lifted in order to get children out of poverty through no fault of their own who are stuck in it.
Well, that's just an important point, and you and I both believe in levelling up, and this isn't just about the north, as you referenced. It's the Midlands, it's South West, it's Wales, it's Scotland, it's Northern Ireland, all those kind of places. I think where we got this wrong was that it's the right ambition and right thing to do, and there are huge benefits to individuals and to the nation if we can properly level up this country. What we weren't clear on is the scale of the problem. It will mean it'll take decades for that to happen. That infrastructure investment takes time. So the economic disparity, if you look at the output, the general productivity per capita in your region or in the northeast of England, and the gap between that and London in relative terms is as wide as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification. And that took 30 years and $2 trillion. So levelling up is absolutely the right thing to do. It just will take more time.
But is that therefore a failure of Conservatism, Kevin? Is that a failure on the Conservatives? Should we be the ones saying sorry for allowing that situation to occur?
Well, I think for not being clear, yeah, of course, I have to say sorry all the time for various stuff, John. We got wrong immigration, we got that wrong. I mean, for not being clear that levelling up would take more than a parliament, I think we should have been clearer on that. It wasn't a few bit of levelling up funds. It was a strategic, decades-long investment, but it's still the right thing to do.
But as you say, the investment takes decades potentially to bring in. So wouldn't it be appropriate to help those families immediately now by finding that £3.5–4 billion to lift those children out of poverty, to remove that child cap and make sure that families is something that's seen as a positive thing when we have a declining birth rate and an ageing population?
Well, I don't agree with that. You may put that forward as a policy. I think benefits bill is high enough because it links directly to the tax bill people's pay. So I'd rather, there's no doubt, if you've seen actually in recent months, you are seeing now real wages increasing above inflation. But the reason real wages haven't increased, there were specific factors around Brexit, around COVID, around the cost of living crisis, one thing after another that hit those real wages. We are seeing that real wages increase now. So there are some benefits to this policy. One thing we got, again, we didn't get right, and we got many things right. I could list them all for you, but you know them all anyway. But the one thing we got drastically wrong was when we could control migration. Finally, in 2022, we got the rules wrong, and immigration has been too high for too long, which has affected the real wages of working people. We absolutely got that wrong. The net migration figures need to be a lot lower. We need to see that business investment in our economy. That will lead to better jobs, better wages. That's the way to get people out of poverty.
But do you know what my frustration is, Kevin? Now, as a Conservative Party member, I was looking for the Conservatives to put forward what would they do? What would they do as an alternative? And what I find frustrating is that still we're not seeing anything. Is Kemi going to have to simply stop the long-awaited policy renewal programme and have to start putting ideas on the table? Otherwise, Nigel Farage is going to suck up all the oxygen.
OK, well, I'll give you a choice, John. You choose which one you want. We can have an approach where sometimes happened in the past, where we simply rush out a policy without costing it properly, without finding out where you're going to get the money from. That's what Nigel Farage has done today, and in their manifesto at the last election. Or you can take your time, I don't mean years, I mean a few more weeks and months, to make sure what we pledge to do we can afford, and then those policies will come out. I think you'll see a lot of those policies coming out by October this year, which will be our party conference. But there's policies already out there. You've been watching the deportation bill, which is the repatriation of every foreign national offender who's in this country, about having indefinite leave to remain, not 5 years, but 15 years, having a Rwanda policy again to deter those small boat crossings, to disapply human rights law, which is effectively the European Convention on Human Rights, from immigration law, so we can do this. Policies are out there already, and you are seeing these things coming through. What you will see from Kemi, in my view, she's a true Conservative, she's strong, she's courageous. Those policies will come out with proper Conservative policies, and they will be implemented, because that was always my experience with Kemi, working for her in the Department of Business and Trade.
Do you know what my frustration is, Kevin? That deportation bill, for example, is something that I was certainly pushing for when I was part of that New Conservatives group with Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates and others. Those type of policies were what we were pushing. Now, there are colleagues on your benches, not you and not Kemi, I'll make that abundantly clear. You were both common sense, sensible Conservatives. But there are many other of your colleagues who rallied against those bits of legislation, those ideas, would say lots of things behind closed doors. In fact, some were briefing to newspapers that people like me were fascists for even having those views. How can I, having seen what went on with some of those colleagues, but more importantly, how can the country truly believe that if you were in government, you would deliver on that type of legislation?
Well, I can understand the frustration you had, and many of us had, and I think as a party at one point we tried to be all things to all people. You can't do that in politics. You know, you've got to nail your colours to the mast, and I don't think we did. And I think some of the policies, particularly on immigration, were wrong. I can point to many things we got right on the economy, on education, on crime, on business, on employment, all those kind of things. But we certainly got it wrong on immigration. It is not right to say that if you want to moderate immigration, if you want to stop the small boats crossings, you're somehow a racist. That is complete nonsense. It's perfectly in order that we want to control migration, control our own borders. In fact, it's essential that we do. And that policy, those policies you see coming down the track from Kemi, people will like and will think we've finally regained our senses when it comes to this particular policy area.
Now, Kevin, you must be sitting there scratching your head. You obviously have a financial background, if I'm not mistaken, or you certainly know the world of finance. You always seem to
business,
business and finance very well. You must be scratching your head when you see what's going on with Rachel Reeves. We've got here the National Institute of Economic and Social Research saying that they reckon Rachel Reeves is going to have to raise taxes to bring in 10 to 30 billion pounds in order to bail her out of the situation, despite the fact that Labour promised to not increase income tax, not increase national insurance and not increase VAT. We know that she managed to the decimal point, bizarrely managed to create the same £9.9 billion headroom in the spring statement, but the tariffs are expected to cost 4.4 billion. Winter fuel U-turn will be 1.5 billion. The two-child cap, which we expect Labour will probably U-turn on 3.5 billion, and 2 billion more on pay deals for public sector workers on top of the 9.5 billion they gave the year before. This is going to be 11.4 billion. So her fiscal headroom has gone. Borrowing at a record high in April, £20.2 billion, the fourth highest on record. So Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' personal poll ratings through the floor. Do you think Rachel Reeves can survive any longer, or do you think this Labour government can survive any longer? Because surely the markets and businesses are saying, you've increased tax on us through national insurance, you've screwed over pensioners, you've screwed over farmers, and I know you represent a farming community, you're now screwing over the fishermen too. No one's going to believe a word they're going to say in the business or financial world, are they?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, she's made the business sector very nervous, because the first thing she did is talk the economy down for 6 months, which damages confidence. Then hit it with business with £25 billion of tax increases and consumers with another 15 billion. And now talk about all this red tape coming down the track. So businesses have lost confidence. The confidence measure for business was +5 when they took over. It's now about -60, according to the Institute of Directors. All this is bad for investment. And I think, will Rachel Reeves survive? Well, I think her and Keir Starmer are clinging on to each other for dear life, because they're both massively in trouble. So I think she probably will, because I think if she goes, Keir Starmer will be next. But I think you're right. I mean, what's coming down the track? We know this is all, the pitch is being rolled right now, isn't it? As it was before the October budget. And this year, we're going to see more tax increases after saying she wouldn't. Again, so many broken promises. And the worst thing is, Two things. The money will be wasted because when they give high pay increases, they don't attach, no strings attached in terms of productivity, which is foolish, but also they won't work. You keep sticking up taxes on the wealthy, which is what they'll have to do. The wealthy will just say, thanks very much, we'll leave it, we'll go in elsewhere. That's what will happen. So it's economically illiterate, very bad politically, and very, very damaging for this country.
The final story I've got to tell you is we had Tory MPs allegedly telling Boris Johnson, we don't want you back. Well, allegedly a shadow cabinet minister, a colleague of yours, has given an anonymous quote saying they could not think of a single one of their colleagues who thought Mr Johnson returning to the Conservative Party fold would be a good thing. Would you like to see Boris Johnson back in Parliament? And if he were, do you think he'd make a good leader again?
Well, Boris has got his friends. That wasn't me who said that. I don't know who said it. I always a bit suspicious of anonymous quotes, whatever potential role they might have. Listen, Boris has his friends. He's loved by many parts of the country and many people in the country, and some people he's not their favourite person. But isn't that politics, Jonathan? Some people like you, some people don't like you. That's the fact. At least, you're always going to have your proponents and your opponents. I have a lot of time for Boris. I don't think he's the leader to take us forward. I think we've got a very good leader in Kemi. I say she's too conservative. So will her policies be, and crucially, she's courageous, and she'll make sure those policies are implemented.
Are you concerned, though, by the polling showing regularly 17 to 19%, and obviously 670 councillors being lost in the local elections recently in May? Do you think it's just about Conservative MPs, but most importantly members, holding their nerve?
I am very concerned about that, of course, but it is about holding the nerve. That's crucial. I mean, where we are in the polls and where we were at the local election results, it was a measure of where we've been, not where we're going. And I think so it's understandable those results were very poor for us, and they were. But I think people over the next coming months and then coming years, people will see that change, because I think the more those policies come out that you're desperate for, you're very impatient for, and so am I think more that people will realise that Kemi's the real deal. And I think people will like what she's got to say and how she says it. And so I think our fortunes will improve.
Well, Kevin Hollinrake, Conservative Member of Parliament and Shadow Secretary of State for Communities, Housing and Local Government, thank you so much for all your time this evening and for jumping in so late in the day. I really do appreciate it.